In September, the UN General Assembly will vote on whether to recognize Palestine as an independent and sovereign state with full rights in the United Nations. However, when the United Nations votes on Palestinian statehood, it will intersect with other realities and other historical processes. First, it is one thing to declare a Palestinian state. It is quite another thing to create one. Second, this vote will come at a time when two of Israel's neighbors are coping with their own internal issues. Syria is in chaos, with an extended and significant resistance against the regime having emerged. Meanwhile, Egypt is struggling with internal tensions over the fall of President Hosni Mubarak and the future of the military junta that replaced him. Adding to this, the U.S. Withdrawal from Iraq and the potential rise of Iranian power and the potential recognition of a Palestinian state, while perfectly logical in an abstract sense, becomes an event that can force a regional crisis in the midst of ongoing regional crises. It thus is a vote that could have significant consequences. Egypt is the power that geographically isolates Hamas through its treaties with Israel and with its still functional blockade on Gaza. More than anyone, Hamas needs genuine regime change in Egypt. The new regime it needs is not a liberal democracy, but one in which Islamist forces supportive of Hamas, namely the Muslim Brotherhood, come to power. Though it is not easy for a small movement to redefine a large nation, in this case it could perhaps happen. There is a broad sense of happiness in Egypt over Egypt's treaty with Israel, an issue that comes to the fore when Israel and the Palestinians are fighting. As in other Arab nations, passions surge in Egypt when the Palestinians are fighting the Israelis. Under Mubarak, these passions were readily contained in Egypt. Now the Egyptian regime unquestionably is vulnerable, and pro-Palestinian feelings cut across most, if not all, opposition groups. It is a singular, ununifying force that might suffice to break the military's power, or at least to force the military to shift its Israeli policy. Last week's attack on the Elliott Road should be understood in this context. Some are hypothesizing that new Islamist groups forming in the Sinai or Palestinian groups in Gaza operating outside Hamas's control carried out the attack. But while such organizations might formally be separate from Hamas, I find it difficult to believe that Hamas, with an excellent intelligence service inside Gaza and among the Islamist groups in the Sinai, would not at least have knowledge these groups' broad intentions and would not have been in a position to stop them. Just as Fatah created Black September in the 1970s, a group that appeared separate from Fatah but was in fact covertly part of it, the strategy of creating new organizations to take the blame for conflicts is an old tactic both for the Palestinians and throughout the world. Hamas's ideal attack would offer it plausible deniability, allowing it to argue it did not even know an attack was imminent, much less carrying it out, and trigger an Israeli attack on Gaza. Such a scenario casts Israel as the aggressor and Hamas as the victim, permitting Hamas to frame the war to maximum effect in Egypt and among the Palestinians, as well as in the wider Islamic world and in Europe. Israel therefore conceivably could face conflict in Gaza, a conflict along the Lebanese border, which would be Hezbollah, and a rising in the West Bank, something it clearly knows. In a rare move, Israel announced plans to call up reserves in September. Though pre-announcements of such things are not common, Israel wants to signal resolution. Israel has two strategies in the face of the potential storm. One is a devastating attack on Gaza followed by rotating forces to the north to deal with Hezbollah and intense suppression of an intifada. Dealing with Gaza fast and hard is the key if the intention is to abort the evolution I laid out. But the problem here is that the three-front scenario I laid out is simply a possibility. There is no certainty here. If Israel initiates conflict in Gaza and fails, it risks making a possibility into a certainty. It could also create a crisis for Egypt's military rulers, not something the Israelis want. War thus benefits Hamas, even if Hamas maintains plausible deniability by having others commit the attacks. A war Hezbollah has good reason to enter at such a stage, and that Fatah does not want to do, but could be forced into. Such a war could shift the Egyptian dynamic significantly to Hamas's advantage, while Iran would certainly want Bashar Assad to be able to say to Syrians that a war with Israel is no time for a civil war in Syria. Israel would thus find itself fighting three battles simultaneously. The fear for Israel then becomes a Middle East chain reaction of its neighbors. Even though Saudi Arabia, Egypt, and Jordan have taken a hands-off approach when it comes to Hamas, there is no real way to know how much behind closed doors influence they may have over the terrorist group. Syria may join the battle in an attempt to divert world attention away from dethroning dictator Bashar Assad and uniting the nation in a fight against Israel. Is it possible that this scenario could evolve into the prophetic Psalm 83 war? Could the September 20th UN recognition vote of a Palestinian state set off a cataclysmic Middle East explosion that could pull in Egypt, Syria, Saudi Arabia, and Jordan into a religious war against Israel? I certainly wouldn't rule it out, and it could be much worse. This is Terry Malone with the Calvary Prophecy Report.